welcome again, right? This is a little breakout session on OER. I'm Richard Gentry. I'm from Sacramento City College and have the lovely title of co-chair for our Accessible Educational Resource Committee, which means that I was the sucker who volunteered. But I look forward to seeing what we can learn from each other today about our experiences and needs. So again, for those that are just coming in, there's a little poll on have you used OER? That way I can maybe have some clue about where we direct some of this conversation. All right. So I can see quite a few of you haven't used OER before. I guess really one of the questions I have is it a lack of material or fear or just no experience?
No experience in my case, Richard.
Yeah, same here, no experience.
Yeah, it's once I started getting into it, I found that it starts then turning into some of not readily available. Out of curiosity, what would help you potentially use OER material?
Just need to be brought up to speed on it.
Yeah, same here. I have a lot, but it's just something I haven't gotten around to yet. So if it's easier than what I already have, more accessible and more easily, I guess you could say, integratable into the program, then yeah, let's do it.
Part of the problem for me is that it's not as inclusive as the paid programs, but it's a lot cheaper for the students, and that's been one of my major reasons I'd like to find something. SUNY has made an investment in some of the commercial companies, and even they don't have the kinds of things that I need. They're mostly in liberal arts, so I'm always looking for new OER stuff. I move around a lot. I teach a new class almost every semester because I will. So any resources would be great.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and I'll share a slide deck that I actually threw together real quick today. It's not inclusive. I just grabbed the main ones I use and put it in chat here. But yeah, well, okay, so there's, right, this is a great thing. I'll start with some of the simplest ones. Resources you already know of. Go to your manufacturers. One of the biggest I can think of is Train. How many of you have seen the Train publications that they put out? Yeah. Yeah, you can do a Google search. Train has quite a few of them published in PDF. If you can't find them there, I'd say contact your local Train rep and see if they can get you a PDF copy. They aren't classic in the traditional sense of OER in that you can modify them, but they are free. And they're vetted, right? So you know the materials is accurate. So that's a resource that's in that slide deck is Train. They have some really great publications.
Honeywell's old gray manuals great as a good one as well.
Mm-hmm.
A little hard to find nowadays, but you can still find it if you dig a little bit.
Yeah, I'll add that to my resource because I hadn't looked for the Honeywell ones.
I use that one too.
How many people here have ex-military background? Ever looked for your military manuals? right? They have great field manuals on how to do stuff. I've got a whole Google Drive folder that's just earmarked for military manuals. And you can find them on a quick Google search. I did one this break that we have because I'm trying to generate a new drawing manual because I do a sketching and drafting. They've got whole books on how to do sketching and drafting. So you just have to import it into a system that works or use it as is.
Is it on Google or do you have to be military to access it?
It's on the internet. If it's right, depending upon classification levels and things like that, it ultimately comes out as a PDF. People scan them as they get the books, turn them digital. So they are actually an OER source because they're it's a public document. So you can edit them as you want. Right. So that's another style of resource you can go to is your government, right? Your EPAs, your Department of Energy. All of these places have publications they're yours to use. One of the safety things I use is the OSHA, right? OSHA puts out all sorts of manuals. So depending on what you need, all sorts of things you can do. So go ahead
I'm
and share.
curious at this point with that information, how would that have affected your answer on have you used OER before? Because it would definitely swap my answer.
Yeah, same here. I would have changed mine because I use the Honeywell grade manual, the Berkeley guide, the TAC guide, which Schneider Electric produces. I use those three. So if those fall into that category, then I should be a yes too, I guess.
Right. And this is that part I'm trying to get. There's that traditional definition, right? We can modify it. But what we're really concerned with really when I start thinking OER is how many of us have had our students not buy textbooks? Yeah. Right. So if it's free and you can put it in your learning management system, now you've eliminated that whole barrier. So
Question, Richard.
Yeah.
One thing we do with I know it's been brought up in previous workshops, but for our devices class, which is the second semester, and we just focus on IO devices, we've historically used the Kelly manual, their Kelly catalog, and for the past year or so, they've done away with producing the actual hard copy. Our students could actually reach out to them and get a hard copy mailed to their house, but now they don't produce it. It's all electronic. So we just use that.
mm-hmm.
I don't know if you consider that as OER too, maybe. I don't.
Right. Again, it doesn't meet that traditional, but it sure meets our end goal, which is making our students successful.
Our library does a lot of books. We put them on reserve, but they also have a lot of online books that can be shared. So they may only have 3 copies, but the students can check them out and use them. And I've actually never had any of my students say, "Oh, I couldn't get it because somebody else was using it." So that's another way to get the textbooks to them. I'm pretty sure that we're all in the same boat where our students are not coming from, from wealthy families. They're mostly coming from, and it's a lot more expensive to go to school than when I was a student. I can tell you that. It's $500 a semester for tuition when I went to SUNY Canton in the 70s.
Yeah.
But I'm just old.
Not old, just experienced. Right. But these are these ideas you can do. But yeah, we've done that same thing. Is that there was a book I used for my workplace success course, and I have no free version of it unless I want to start paying somebody to write scenarios. So I worked with the library and they bought enough copies to handle my class. So now the students can just go to the library, check it out. It removes that barrier, right? So it's not traditional OER, but this is another way of us making our students successful. Then there's actually a really great resource that I discovered, and beyond just their textbooks, they're actually very welcoming. It's a BC campus, and I'll actually post the link directly in here in chat, and it's British Columbia, and I've been to several of their webinars. And the one thing that British Columbia has been doing is they're actually investing heavy money in their trades. They just gave a grant for $20,000 for 2 gentlemen to write their next volume of their applied math textbook. And I've applied for our grants in California and can't get it because they basically tell me I don't have enough students. Right, they're after the larger math classes in English, but they have some great trade stuff that they have. I'm currently modifying their fundamentals of electrical book so that it more matches my classes and adds some material in, which goes with this other link I'll share with you. Is out of UC Davis, and it's called LibreText. And I sent you the link that is for the workplace or workforce catalog they have. And so I'm currently working on both the fundamentals book and a drafting book that will more match what my class does, because we don't get into the technical drafting. It's right. This is how you can draw something on the roof. So they have a bunch of books that are available through there.
So the other issue with the OER is when, I don't know what, are you getting paid for this, or is this all, well, it's out of the goodness of your heart? And so that's limited the growth of OER to some extent, but we have open source software, we have open source hardware now. So we're becoming socialists.
Well, in this aspect, my ultimate goal when I came into teaching, I think like most of us, is our students. So it might take me a little while of time to generate a new book because I'm not making money on it. But if my end goal is my student success, I'll take the time to do it.
You didn't get into it for the money?
Took a cut and pay.
Just checking.
Cut and pay.
He got into it for the glamour.
Mm-hmm. Got into it because I think there was an S written on my forehead. But yeah, so these are some of the resources that I have. So this is something that I've floated in the past is look at the size of BEST, right? Look at all the people that are in BEST. This is something that we as an organization, I think, could do well, would be to start taking these textbooks and an idea for a textbook and building out on it, right? Your controls books that you have trouble, you're using stuff that's now out of print. What stops us in that aspect from creating and teaming up to build something?
And they have developed the curricula. So basing the textbooks on what we know in their curriculum as a format, you know, as a organizational structure, make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's my viewpoint, right? You got the curriculum and we're using it all over. So why not create a textbook that matches it? And then you can modify it to fit your teaching style too. Go ahead, Robert.
I was just supporting the idea. I think it's a very good thought, especially for the resources and the bodies that this group has, because we really do have some brilliant people in this group. Yeah,
I agree with that. I've always been impressed with all the help and resources everybody here has always provided me. Is
The-
it, go ahead.
Well, the problem I see with it is just kind of a quality control. You know, if who's going to vet it or edit it, or you know, that's kind of the. I mean, somebody might volunteer to do that, but you want that process, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Right, this would be if this was something that as an organization would go through, you would actually create the structure. And before it was published, you'd have the organization, right? Who's going to vet it? Who's going to proofread it? Right? You're going to have people who might be able to do digital drawings, and then you might have others who write well. And you pick those people to do that job appropriately.
I'm available if you need stories. I'm a good storyteller.
That's awesome. Right?
That's all I bring to the table. I don't know much about what I'm teaching, but
Okay, those real world examples of how to apply some given piece of esoteric information, those will make it stick with the student 10 times better than the best written baloney that your average fiction writer could come up with.
Mhm.
Horror stories of blowing up ductwork.
Yep.
I prefer collapsing it personally, but that one surprises them more.
Mhm.
Yeah, we have a lot. We've broken lots of equipment over our time.
Mhm.
Right. So yeah, right. So that there's a concept, and there's plenty of tools to generate it. And beyond that, you don't always even have to generate it. Like right now, the book I'm generating for my basic electrical class, it's a compilation of multiple other open source resources, right? So the original book didn't have the things I needed, so I'm taking it from other open source resources and generating a whole new textbook from it. So
Well, so that's the thing, though, is like all that time you're putting in is it's not feasible to do that all the time, I guess.
well, all right. So from my perspective, right, and I agree with you, I can't do it for everything. But if once I have a textbook my way versus trying to fight myself to teach the way a publisher wants to do it,
Mhm.
it makes my teaching easier. I don't have to, and if there's a bit of information in it that's wrong or I disagree with because it's my textbook, I can take it out. Right. I don't know how many times I read a publisher's book that has errors in it. I can't ever get them to fix it.
Mhm.
Well, the other thing is when you're teaching, you want to make revisions as you work the material and use the material in classes. That's what I've seen.
Yeah.
So it gets ideally it's dynamic. The curriculum's dynamic.
Mhm. I guess that's my point, is I find it easier just to write it from scratch sometimes rather than try and find some material and piece it together. You know, it's like you have to wade through everybody else's material. It's like, I'll just write it, you know. So
That's exactly how I teach my BAS classes, because exactly that, I don't like the textbooks. But to address your concern about the amount of work associated, no doubt that there's a huge amount of work with it. And sometimes the rewards may be greater or lesser depending. But when you work with it on a group, when you can distribute that work across more shoulders, it becomes easier and easier. Granted, not necessarily for the people on editing, proofreading end, or the group who's kind of the team master who's making sure people get their work done. But
mhm.
it is
No,
definitely.
Yeah, I like the idea. I'm just like, I don't want just a repository that you have to wade through, I guess is what I'm saying. I don't think that's necessarily valuable.
Agreed.
It's that it's been edited, vetted, it's useful. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I've experienced what you're talking about, right? Trying to find resources and going through it and going, this is useless, right? What good is this? And you're digging through it, and that's part of why I'm thankfully in our industry, we don't have too many open source textbooks, so there's not too much to wade through. Finding it's usually the hardest part in the first place. Oh, and there was one other I wanted to mention, right? Is ASHRAE. This was something that Brad here is actually using, and I know several others use. You don't have to purchase the ASHRAE documents. They have read-only versions on their website.
You sure? I know when I've used ASHRAE textbooks, they're more expensive than anything I've bought. In fact, we bought them and loaned them out because they were prohibitively expensive. They were $300 a piece, and you know they really weren't worth it. But we could use them each year.
The ASHRAE standards, right? All the ASHRAE standards that stuff is referenced to, they actually have online versions. You can't download them, but they are a website viewable. You can access all the ASHRAE standards.
That's why I tried to. I couldn't download them. That's why I was. That's why I got stuck. Okay. Thanks for that.
I will. Right there's always alternate ways, and I won't get into anything further. But
yeah, I figured that out.
But there are
with a little help.
Right, but they do publish all of their standards online in a read-only format. So in this day and age of most students having cell phones, they can read their standards at the worst case off their cell phone.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, I have students that tried to take my course in Microsoft Office on their phone.
Mm-hmm. I can't stand it.
I can't say my eyes are too old and can't see that little thing, but they did everything on their phone. Kids these days.
Yeah, what are we going to do with them? And then there was one other place that I use in my fundamentals class. It's they have more than just electrical. It's called FET, and they have little simulators that you can use. They have electrical simulators, and they even have one that you can play with solutions. So you can evaporate the water, you can dump the water. So, right, you're doing a water treatment class and trying to explain cooling towers and what's happening with minerals, right? There's a simulator for it. So they can actually play with this concept.
Yeah, I use those a lot in my mechanical engineering classes, and they're awesome. I think that simulations, and I'd love to see more simulations done. It'd be nice if Siemens and the big guys did some simulations for some of their equipment. It would be really, really nice to be able to teach them that way. And I think we're looking at a partnership with Siemens here as soon as we can talk again, but in developing our building automation program, but hopefully they'll be able to provide some of that. And particularly now when we can't really touch equipment.
Yeah, it would be nice. And then going to the chat, I agree, right? There's our campus, our president of our campus chose to not kick students off even during COVID, right? That was his unwritten policy, and they left the Wi-Fi up because that at least a student can get on campus and find Wi-Fi, right? So it wasn't published, but they didn't kill the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, we had students, we actually advertised that they could go sit in certain parking lots to get access. I had one student last spring who was online, and I'm looking in the background, and there's a barn in the background. She's outside, and there's a barn in the background. She said that's the only place you can get any service. And it was February in North Country, so.
Hey, Richard, question. Comment was made about Siemens. I found a very nice PowerPoint that Siemens produced. I remember the previous workshop, Russ, you had some nice information that you used with Siemens also. And I've used this PowerPoint very effectively. It's nice. It just lays out PPCL line by line coding. With block programming, I've historically used, we talked about it yesterday, the contemporary controls. And I've just kind of, worked through the blocks when it comes to HVAC and everything, but I've never seen a nice document, PowerPoint, OER, what have you, when it comes to teaching block programming with HVAC. I've just kind of done my own thing with it. Has anybody seen anything to that end?
No. Contemporary Controls has got some really nice videos on the different logic blocks. I use that in conjunction with my lectures, and I am starting to put some PowerPoint slides together regarding the individual blocks. It's a work in progress.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, that's exactly what I've been doing. I just haven't started a PowerPoint yet.
And it fits my style of teaching. I don't have to try to fit their style of presentation.
Right.
Because I don't use a lot of words in my PowerPoints. I'll use the images so that I can talk about them and they can visually see them.
Mhm.
But I don't like a lot of words on my stuff. If I see words on the slide, I have a tendency to read it, and I don't want to be reading it.
Exactly.
So one
The other
possible
thing.
resource- sorry, Screw, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Robert.
One possible resource for actually teaching from that, actual HVAC on the block-based controlling, you might check out KMC's YouTube channel, old Kruger Manufacturing. They've actually been doing a pretty good number of videos on their newer Conquest series controllers.
Can you say that again, please, Robert? TMC?
KMC,
Tom, Matt,
I'll
Charles?
grab a link here in a second
Okay.
for you.
Kruger.
Yep.
Kruger Manufacturing Company.
And part of the reason that we run into such a challenge finding companies that have done the how to program on HVAC equipment is because really most of these people who are trying to teach the programming for these companies are people who help develop the software, which means they're software engineers.
Yep.
And they're programmers. They're not HVAC programmers. So that's part of the challenge behind finding exactly what you're looking for.
And just, I guess, another thought along those lines, with the systems, we teach a systems integration class, which is part of the curriculum on the website. And we have some labs where we, integrate some various controllers on the back net and all of that. But again, it's just been, working through it, talking them through the process, that sort of thing, but not really having manuals to that end of how to bring things on the back net, what have you. Does anybody have anything in that regard? Or I'm assuming we're on the same page with the programming.
Pretty much on the same page. I use a lot of manufacturers' literature, help books. Johnson's got a really good help book. So does Contemporary Controls. And then I fill the blanks that those have with lecture. But as far as putting something together for myself as of yet, no, I don't. I'm actually slowly creating reading pages in our we use Canvas as our learning management software, and I'm slowly building reading pages in that I'm taking bits and pieces that I want out of different literatures and combining it all into one. So I guess I'm slowly creating a book.
Plagiarize
so to
book,
speak.
but a book.
Yeah.
No, because it's open resource, open out there on the internet.
There you go. That's it.
Still copyright, right? That's the part we have to be careful of. Because I've got my, I've got notes that I've made for my lectures and I'll hand them to the students, but it's not going into the textbook I have because it's all plagiarized, right? Oh, I need this. Oh, I need that. But it's all copyright off of somebody's website.
So I just threw another link into the description to some brochures actually from a company called Prolon. One of my local distributors picked up their line a couple years ago and handed me a stack of their brochures just to page through. And the one thing that really caught me as brilliantly useful was in the back of them, because they're kind of controls company more oriented towards mechanical companies and electrical companies. So there's no programming or anything. It's a lot of pre-programmed stuff. But in the back of the books for a rooftop unit or for VAV controllers and air handlers, things like that, they'll actually go through and do a full-on explanation of what this system is and standard sequences of how they work.
Very cool. Useful.
Links don't work inside of it though.
All right.
Sounds like dinner time.
Well, I was
Yeah, they're getting a little ambitious. They like their lunch around 2 o'clock and I've been putting it off.
Well, I made it to 5:30 before my guy says you got to get up there. Too
So
much.
By 5 o'clock, I'll have both of them, one on each side of me, just pestering me.
so those,
Good information, Richard.
what was that?
Very good information.
Oh, you're very welcome. Right, this is some of what I've learned to dig through and tried to gather, because we as an industry don't have too many resources. Actually, give me just a second and I'll actually give you guys all access to my Google Drive here. And you can look at all the military manuals I have. Don't guarantee they're all applicable. When I find a resource that seems to have ones that I might be able to use, I download everything I can. Exactly.
What's the statement? Copy and source everything? Cite. There we go.
Yeah, cite. But in this case, since they're right public documents, you should be able to access all the military manuals from that link that I've downloaded. Yeah, I mean, I was at a PG&E, right? PG&E does a lot of webinars in our area, Pacific Gas and Electric. Right? So one of the last classes I went to, all his reading was based off of like EPA, Department of Energy, right? Everything they published, that was what he was using to teach from. He built quite a bit out of it.
Is PG&E material, is that open source as well? Do you know?
Well, the PG&E portion isn't so much, right? PG&E is the utility, but each of their instructors brings their own material into the classroom and then they hand it out. And often a lot of the stuff they hand out is public documents.
I saw something, I forget his name, an instructor with the Pacific Center, Energy Center, I guess. And he had said there was some open source stuff. I'll have to track it down. I'll forward it to you.
Yeah, I'd be very curious. I love gathering up that information. You never know when it's useful. Right. And the other thing is some of the stuff we're teaching, especially in the basics of the refrigeration, right? We often are teaching physics. Don't forget, you can go look at the open source physics textbooks, gas laws, right? Things like that. They're all available. It's all there. But yeah, if anybody's interested, and it sounds like we've kind of mellowed out, I would be quite happy to work with anybody to build this idea up, right? As it is, I'm currently building out the fundamentals of electricity book. And I think after I get done working with that, I'll contact the original publishers out of British Columbia, because they are actually interested in helping each other out. They've invited me up to their other webinars and things like that to help. So this whole idea, we got a big world we can contact, and most people are quite interested in helping. So we wanted to build something special, right? A controls book. It's doable. We have the resources. We don't even have to invent the technology.
I would
The
definitely be
person I
interested.
had read about was Ryan Stroop at PG&E.
I know that name.
Yeah, I have a paper by him, the building as a classroom. If you want, I'll throw it into the chat.
Please.
Richard, with the open source or the open resource electrical books that you found, do they have workbooks associated with it as well, or just a textbook?
Just a textbook. Just a textbook. But if that was something, I have some stuff I've kind of created. It's not really like much an official, but I would even be able, right? Goes along with it. I would create the workbooks and questions, right? Well, all my questions and things like that are based out of Campus, but they're readily exportable, right? So you can take it into your learning management system. I've created some small labs and things like that I can use with the PhET simulators. And there's actually PhET's website. They actually have, if you register as an instructor, they actually have curriculum and labs for this stuff that others have already generated and uploaded.
Good deal, appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yeah, right now they have this little electrical simulator. One of the labs I'm going to have them do is calculate out the wire resistance.
So one of the things that I see my students doing more is reading less, watching more videos, and they seem to learn a lot more from that than they do from reading books. So I've accommodated them, and I often bring up, find good lectures on YouTube and around, and there's no sense in me making a bad, doing a mediocre lecture when I can find somebody else who can do a good lecture, then I can answer the questions, because that's really what I'm able to do, and in a more productive way. So, I mean, for me, I think the future, and I don't do as much hands-on stuff because I don't know that much about that stuff. But so I'm teaching a lot of theory, but I'm trying to inspire them, and and their questions, and answering their questions and connecting them. My father used to say, when a polar bear sneezes, it moves the sands of the Sahara. And I've always thought of myself as a detective in search of polar bear snot. So I always like to see how everything connects out into about, to the big wide world a little bit farther than most people. But it gives them a context for that, so that they're, I think that helps them remember a little bit. If nothing else, they enjoy it, and they seem to give me good references. So.
Yeah, they're giving good references is something one of the semesters I had, the books didn't have anything on electrical connections like wire nuts and things like that. So I actually made it the assignment for the students to go find me videos, right? Go find me the material that they would need to actually do this successfully. And then I just incorporated it into my next semester's class.
When they had the bad judgment to assign me engineering safety, which wasn't a very good idea, I said, I don't know anything about this. And he said, look, why don't you take up each of these 8 sections and assign them to students to present? So I had the students teach the course, and they loved it, and they did a good job of it. And I could add in, I learned enough about each section to to make sure that they didn't screw it up and add the things in that they didn't. And it really inspired them. And then they got the experience doing presentations and doing a good job. So it was one of my finest moments. Although I think really the finest moment was when I told a story about not dropping a truck on myself as my own personal Darwin Award story, that they got so scared that they weren't going to do anything dangerous. But
that's funny. Made me think about the time I almost rolled a tractor. But yeah, that's a side story. What I really wanted to comment on was your presentations. I do something like that in my heat pump course, is that I assign them at the beginning. They get certain components. They have to go do the research. And then they present out to the class. Well, it's called an open pedagogy. And one of the things they're pushing is this student, right, research and creation. Some of the textbooks, the beginnings of them were generated by the students. So this is one of the ideas, is that if there's not the material, right, your class can become the creation of the book. I did that in the heat pump course too before I went to the presentations. I just didn't ultimately push it too far because I already knew that they had plagiarized 90% of the material. But within that concept, right, they as a class for themselves had created a lot of reading and a lot of research. And so it ended up actually being a very good study material for them.
one of the things I realized this semester when they were doing presentations, of course, they had to record them. And they were so much better because they could do them more than once. And it's one thing to practice it and then say, oh, I didn't do very well, and then do it again and do practice. But when you practice it and see it, they really did well on the second time. One guy actually edited it in video editor, and it was really, really slick. So it was almost all of them were better recorded than they ever were in so that I felt that was something they learned a lot with.
That's interesting. It might be something that I do differently because my class, I make them do it live via Zoom. So they don't get the chance to edit. They get their harassment of their peers and everything else with it.
Well, they got their harassment, at least not as much from their peers as from me, but they did have to answer questions in real time, but they could put it together and that way. But it's interesting. It'd be interesting I'd be interested to know if you did it that way, whether how it came out, because I thought the quality was good and I thought it inspired them to that next level of presentation.
It's actually a really good idea because they don't have the fear of the class having all eyes on them at that time. Because you can set them up in a room by themselves and they can work on it individually there in that room, not having all eyes of the classroom on them.
And they're used to performing for their social media, so it's similar kind of performance
Great
skills.
Idea.
But I was going to say, I like the pedagogical approach of having students bring the resources in and find information for themselves, because I find that it helps them see that we don't have all the answers, that they have to find the answers for themselves, and kind of helps them build up that skill set that they're going to need when they don't have the instructors there to figure it out. And I always challenge them. I'm like, teach me something I don't know, because if you are going to tell me what I already know, I'm going to find all your problems. But if you find something totally new, I get to learn something and I don't know what you're saying is wrong.
When I was a kid and complained about having to do things in school, my mother would always say, you're not learning that, you're learning how to learn. And I never forgot that. And I always make sure that, to me, it always amazes me that critical thinking is like one learning objective in school. To me, it's the only learning objective, particularly now. You don't have to memorize anything. I don't ever make my students memorize anything. if they use it enough, they'll do it, they'll learn it, they'll memorize it. If they're not using it enough, they can always find it. And it's just trying to keep up with the changes. I mean, I had a typewriter when I was in college, and I was the only one I knew who had a typewriter. And that was because I was made to take typing lessons in 9th grade because nobody could read my handwriting, but it opened up my final career, which was a computer consultant before I became. But anyway.
So just a note, folks, we've got about 2 minutes left. So if anybody has any final comments, we'll start with Richard, of course, since this is his show.
It's not my show. I just got lucky enough to actually be here and was excited to actually present something on OER and have you all here as interest.
I just want to say I am interested, even though I was kind of negative. I am interested because I think it's really important. I just want it to be good. If it's going to get,
You were realistic, Connie, and we appreciate that.
So.
Thank you for all the resources.
There's a lot of resources out there. It takes time on our part to go find them. I spend a lot of time researching it, but it helps me teach the class because I can make the material or the fit the way I teach, and I don't have to try to fit into somebody else's shoes.
And do everybody a favor, when you find good material, tell people about it.
Yeah, that's actually been one of the whole ideas I've been about rethinking my website that I haven't done anything with it in ages, is actually make it HVAC focused with the OER material and resources.
It would make sense for the Best Center to have a repository of these things too at some point in time. Having a single repository and, obviously you're not going to have one, there are going to be many, but just even having our own repository and links to others and getting that out there, because it may mean that you've got even more stuff to go through, but you haven't had to spend all that time to find it.
We do actually have a repository of a lot of resources on the BEST website. Previous recorded lectures from our events and things, as well as found resources that people have contributed or created.
Where on the website would that be?
You had to ask that question.
I knew we went to. Because I was thinking it.
I didn't mean for it to end on a bad note.
No, it is behind the login wall. So once you get to the website, just go to the login and request a login. Now that you've been to one of our events, it takes a couple days just to get through the admin processes, but they'll let you in.
I'll tell them.
And with that, I agree with the resources. One of the things that I would advise if we're going to go this route is to pick one place for them to be. Because one of the things that drives me nuts is having repositories everywhere I have to go look. So there's some arguments about the LibreText because there's in my college, there's been some butts of heads between UC Davis and our college, but their catalog system works. It would be theoretically, we could use something like that. There's several others, and I would be willing to learn or work through any of them. If somebody is interested, I would be happy to start working on this as a concept.
I would be happy to contribute as well. So Stephen Chow asks if anybody has looking for info on basic controls. Has anyone used the Battelle version? B-A-T-T-E-L-L-E. Is that familiar to anyone? Doesn't look like anyone has, Stephen. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah.
I'm also sorry to say we are out of time. And just so you're aware that the closing session with Peter is up next on the agenda here in about 3 minutes.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks,
Good session, Richard. Good session. Thank you.